Welcome to Parev TV. We are really excited and honored to be joined by four students and their professor from Washington State University who recently traveled to Armenia. It's part of a program of the school's journalism department, School of Journalism, Marrow. And leading the group was Professor Allison Boggs. But the thing is, Allison, let me first thank you for coordinating this interview, coordinating much more than we realized because you are the force putting it together. What can you tell us about the program of your school and why was Armenia selected this time?
Yeah, I really do want to defer to my students for the majority of this interview, but I'll give that background just so everybody can understand what we do. At the Murrow College of Communication at Washington State University, we have a very prestigious program called Backpack Journalism, in which these students compete among dozens of other students to be part of this. It's a competitive process and they're selected through a rigorous process with a faculty panel. And then the program is free to them. So the trip is free to them like a scholarship, aside from, their spending money and whatnot. And every year we select a different international locale, and we try to report stories that we then try to publish upon our return. And we have gone to a variety of places over the years, from Nepal to Serbia to Kenya, Puerto Rico over the years, and just tried to publish stories. And this year we chose Armenia just because we have a new program at the Murrow College in which we're trying to collaborate with journalism programs in other countries. And the Murrow College has a collaboration with the American University of Armenia, their journalism program. And so because also of the refugee situation with Nagorno-Karabakh, Artsakh, as Armenians call it, we were really interested in trying to interview people who were affected by that, and we thought it would be a great story to try to weigh in on. So,
I'd like to ask Cole. Cole, when you heard about this program, how much about Armenia did you know, and why were you jumping into this program with these group of friends?
So my experience with the history of Armenia, the first experience I've ever had with it was one of my favorite bands, System of a Down. They're from Armenia, one of my favorite bands, and I remember that was my first experience because they sing a lot about the history of Armenia and their music. So that was kind of my first experience with it. And then in 2020, I knew about the second Nagorno-Karabakh war. I was following it a bit briefly, and then I wasn't fully aware of the offensive in 2023, up until a little bit later, before preparing for the trip. I do know that, like, in those coming months, in order to prepare for the trip, I educated myself on what was going on specifically in 2023, and a little bit of 2020 just to catch up. And then also the history of Armenia, dating back from, when it was, back into its medieval roots and up until the Armenian genocide. And that's been, before going on the trip, that was basically my extent of knowledge of Armenia that I had.
Yeah. Morgan, when you left home and you traveled on this 7,000-mile trip to Armenia, not easy to get to, layovers and delays and all, when did you really feel you're in Armenia? What was your first impression?
Well, I remember that we were all very tired after the flight, but we got in. It was dark outside, so we didn't really get to experience the views as much because I couldn't see as much while we were driving to our hotel, the Paris Hotel in Yerevan. And I do remember looking out the windows and seeing people hanging out together outside, and I was just kind of thinking about like how I don't really see that often in like the neighborhoods that I'm from, at least, where people are just hanging out and talking outside. And I feel like that community feeling was definitely there as soon as we got there.
Uh, Maggie, what was the barrier in terms of language barrier? As you settled and you went out the first day, there are people you see, I guess quite a few people speak English, but what was the language barrier? How did you feel there with the language?
Yeah, I think especially as journalists, we kind of struggled to be able to really connect with some of the people that we spoke to, especially refugees from Artsakh, because, you know, they only spoke Armenian. And it was critical that we had our fixer, Sona. She's a journalist in Armenia, and she speaks Armenian and English and a couple other languages as well. And she was really critical to not only helping us with the language barrier, but really being able to connect with the people we were talking to when there was that barrier of language and we didn't know exactly what they were saying in that moment. She was really critical to really understanding the situation more than just like reading about it online. So I think it was a struggle, but we were so lucky to have such an amazing journalist with us to help us there.
Jasper, you were hosted by the American University of Armenia, a very noble institution. They've done a lot of work, good work. What did it mean to you? How did it facilitate your experience in Armenia?
It was really incredible to get to see a college there. And also we had the opportunity to speak with some of the students in that program. And that was really a cool experience because we kind of got to trade some stories about what college was like there versus our experience as college students. It was also really cool to get to speak with a lot of the people who are working on this program. There's a lot of people at AUA who are really passionate about journalism and about trying to invest more in education around that topic. And so getting to have these discussions around a topic I think all of us are also so passionate about was really rewarding. And I feel like also kind of contributed to our understanding of the area and like general life in Yerevan.
Cole, when you speak and you see these people in Armenia, displaced people, 100,000 Armenians from Artsakh, from Wrapup, what goes in your mind? What is the main message they have us to hear? What is it they want us to hear?
Being from my experience, going to one of these events held by it was an event held by oh gosh, what was the NGO
Action
called?
Against Hunger.
Well, it was Action Against Hunger, and then it was like sponsored like by another one. I'm trying to think of Mission for Armenia. That's what it was. And when we went to the event, I remember going to the event, like a lot of the forcibly displaced people that wanted their stories to be told, I think saw in the fact that like the thing is with Western media in America, I feel like, is that a specific conflict and what's going on in Artsakh right now is not widely known. I can guarantee you, if you were to walk around the streets of America in a big city and ask people about the events that are going on in the Caucasus right now, a lot of people would not really understand what's going on.
Absolutely.
And I think that it's important for, a lot of Western journalists like us to, come in and experience those stories and report on them firsthand, because I feel like there's kind of that disconnect between a lot of localized regional conflicts compared to like other conflicts, like, and obviously the war in Ukraine gets a lot of coverage in Europe and America, but a lot of these regional conflicts, not just in the Caucasus, but as in other countries. Like I remember there's a recent war in Western Africa that I didn't even know about until 4 years after, back in late 2010s, I believe. And I think that kind of demonstrates that a lot of these conflicts, like Western outlets and Western journalists, need to be reporting on these types of conflicts, because it's important that people like Americans are able to understand what's going on outside the realms of what their country's politics touch, if that makes sense. And I feel like, going to Armenia and, being there firsthand was an incredible experience, and an important one in order to try to get that information out, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. Maggie, as part of your experience on this very special project, you were asked, or you are being asked to also share your experience. How are you going to share it? What platform are you going to use, and what will be your message?
Yeah, I'm a traditional broadcast news student, so I work on our campus's television station and work as a journalist in our newscasts that we do. And as part of that, we kind of have connections to local news stations in the area as well, in the greater Eastern Washington region. And so my hope is to produce news packages about both the collaboration with our university and the American University of Armenia, as well as some of the frustrations that journalists face in Armenia, as Cole was kind of saying, as these Western journalists kind of pop in, and when there's something that they feel is newsworthy, kind of get a brief idea, but not really understanding the full situation, and then leaving and kind of leaving them in the dark as far as coverage and informing the public about the conflicts and struggles that are going on in the region. And so I kind of want to cover that frustration, because I think that is a universal frustration for journalists, especially journalists. We are in a very rural part of Washington state, and so we kind of feel the same way when something large happens, and then like larger national media covers it and then leaves, and then kind of leaves us to deal with the aftermath. And it's definitely not as big of a scale as what Armenia and the refugee crisis is there. But I think that is a universal struggle that all journalists in small areas geographically face, as things that are very difficult for them happen, and then these kind of larger national reporters kind of swoop in and kind of make more of a mess.
Maggie, we read books, we go to lectures, we listen to professors, but when we are there on an experience such as this, what did it teach you? What did it teach you about the life of a reporter, the challenges reporters face?
I think for me, it taught me so much about having empathy for what we're reporting on. And when, it's easy when it's something that we care about going into the story, but I think seeing the reporters in Armenia really being so involved in the crisis, being like knowing people from Artsakh and really having that personal connection to it, they had so much care and passion for the story, not because it's a good story or because it would make good news, but because it was something that was important to them. And I think having that mindset and really caring about your community, about people that you're going to report on, really changes how you view the situation and what kind of care and empathy you put into the story and for the people that you're reporting on, and seeing them more than just a news subject or potential interview, but really as people that need a platform to share their story.
Morgan, what was your experience like with the refugees? What story struck you? What is one highlight that really you would like to share? And what means will you use to share these stories?
So I work with a radio and podcast format. So I tell my stories through audio only, and pictures, and sometimes that's accompanied by articles, but mainly audio. And so the way I'm going to kind of give you a background on what the picture looked like. When we came in, me and Cole weren't sure if we were even going to get a story. We were there for the purpose of understanding what is happening to the people who were forcibly displaced from Artsakh. And so we obviously wanted to be able to be there for them to be able to share their story if they wanted to, but we were very aware that that might not be a possibility, especially because there are some scary connections between what Azerbaijan is doing with like soldiers and the connections they're finding through social media. Azerbaijan is definitely kind of playing into like a social media, like they're investigating these people and trying to sometimes do them harm. And I don't even know the extent of that, but I know that that is happening. And so some of them didn't want to share their names when they did end up wanting to tell their story. But when we walked into the room, we were definitely looked at funky. They were probably a little bit concerned about why there were people with audio equipment and a camera in the room, especially with that kind of background context going on. And as we were sitting there just listening, they obviously told them that we wouldn't be using that equipment unless they gave their consent. So that was definitely made clear that we were a tool and not a basically dive bombing like a dead carcass type of thing. We're not trying to get like the pieces. We're not scavenging. We're here to give them a tool if they wanted it, but that we weren't forcing that. And so as we watched the meeting unfold, we kind of saw them warming up to us. In some ways, I feel like at first we were kind of like looked at like uncomfortably, and then we got some more warm glances. And so by the halfway point of the meeting, these women, they were all women in this room, teaching them how to be more competitive in the workforce in Yerevan, because the work that they did in Artsakh was very different, and the landscape was very different, and so their skills and knowledge just didn't fit into, I guess, the Yerevan type of culture, because Artsakh is very culturally different. At the same time, they are Armenian, but they have their own culture. I mean, I'm sure you know, I'm just describing what I got from the experience.
But you have done your homework. You have done your homework well.
Yeah. Yes. So by the time we actually got to sit down for the interviews, we were with our fixer Sona, and I was recording them after obviously they gave their consent. And some of them didn't want their names used or didn't want their names, their voice, like even the way it left the way it was. But by the time we really got into the interview process, Sona basically leaned over and told me, I think they won't tell their full story from the way they really want to if I keep coming over and translating it for you in between them telling their story. So we're still getting some of that background translated at this moment. I just texted our fixer today about that. She's still working on it and she's almost done. But from the gist of the situation, I could not even being able to understand what they're saying, you could just see, the pain. And I mean, I think that I'm honored that they even felt like I was worthy of their story. I think journalists really need to change their mindset and kind of feel more honored by a story that they're being given rather than kind of scavenging for it. I felt like the fact that they even trusted me with that information was like, I felt like truly and deeply honored. There was no words. I felt like I didn't really deserve that. But now that I was given the opportunity to get their story, I will not stop until people really get a hold of it and understand what's going on there, because I feel like although it's really important that our youth, I feel like, are involved in some of the geopolitical stuff. Like, I know that a lot of youth in social media is really involved in what's going on in Gaza. And I think that that is super important. But at the same time, I feel like there are so many places that just don't get that type of recognition, where atrocities have happened to these people and they never even get their voices heard. And I think that I'm just honored that I can pass it along, especially as someone who wasn't even aware of the situation. I didn't even see any news headlines, and I'm a journalism student. And I think that's really upsetting, is that I'm a journalism student. I look for these stories and I still wasn't seeing those news pop up on my phone. And I feel like to be able to pass those stories along and like make people know what happened is important. And I think that their stories are very valuable. What I do know, as far as what was translated, was that these people saw the soldiers come in. They saw the violence. They had their children. One of them was pregnant at the time, had a kid with her. And they were seeing these soldiers come upon the city, the town. And so what I know of what I got at the beginning before it went into fully just Armenian to, make sure that they felt like they had a safe space to tell their story, is that it was hard for them. That's for sure. I'm going to wait until I actually have their full story to kind of get into that and let them speak for themselves. But yeah, it was, they had a lot of pain. Yeah.
Jasper, you just heard Maggie talk about the pain. We all feel the pain. I've never been to the area with the refugees. Miles away, we feel the pain. Imagine your house being destroyed, you were displaced. How can you talk about that pain to people who are not there? What would you like to tell Armenian community about the pain you have witnessed in the area?
I mean, I think there's a level of empathy that I hope everyone has, that when you're hearing people talk about things that are so personal, that translates. I mean, I think that's one of the important areas of journalism, is it can bring those emotional stories from so many different places, especially in this age with social media and the internet. We can bring these stories that have such deep emotion and bring them to audiences that aren't close by so that they can still understand what's going on. And again, I really understand that emotional empathy side. I think empathy is just such an important thing, from, as Morgan talked about, from the journalism side too, as we're reporting on these stories, but also from the audience point of view, and as journalists looking at distributing these stories and remembering that, like, we need to respect the people that we're reporting on as individuals that have gone through these traumatic experiences. While we were in Armenia, we also had the opportunity to interview a documentarian, Lika. Her diary set the basis for the documentary Invisible Republic. And she talked about not just the trauma of going through that war, but the trauma after, and like how that doesn't go away. I mean, that's something that these people are going to be living with forever. So again, like, even as we talk about Western media not reporting on these in the time, there are still so many important topics around this, and these people are going to be carrying this with them for the rest of their lives. And there's just, I think, so much around that still needs to be explored and can still be understood to international audiences and to people not in Armenia directly.
There's so much you can talk about. Especially you came recently from a trip, once in a lifetime experience, and there's so much you would like to share. I know, and we have this problem of time. We would like to condense the video to 15 minutes or so. But I was really impressed by you being equipped with your iPhones, and I think Cole had his Nikon camera, and everybody was like fully armed there. And I'm sure you had and so many thousands of pictures you took and interviews you conducted. To sort these out will take forever. Professor Alison Boggs, thank you again for this opportunity to talk to your students. But the last question I have, which is something the Armenian nation is concerned with, is whether there is the remotest of chance for these people to go back to their homes, or is it a pipe dream, or what can be done about that matter?
Do any of you guys have a sense of that from the experiences you had talking to some of the refugees?
Yeah. I know. I was just gonna say, so we spoke with Maggie and I had the opportunity to speak with someone from the UN, and they talked a lot about there were discussions in the works of trying to allow these people to go back, but what that would look like and the details of that hadn't been sorted out yet, and especially weren't public knowledge. So that's my background on that. I don't know if you have more to add, Morgan.
Well, I was just going to say that I think that from what I understand, some of the forcibly displaced people don't feel comfortable even living close to the border due to their trauma. I think others obviously want to go home because that is their home. It's just now no longer occupied by the people who owned those homes. But I do want to say that I think that it would take a lot of also international pressure to even give them the chance to have their home back. I think that a lot of times the international connections between Turkey and the geopolitical situation with the area sometimes causes, I feel like, the surrounding countries to feel like they can take advantage of Armenia. That's kind of what I've gotten through the gist of my understanding of seeing the historical background. And so I think that in order to really give these people the chance to have their homes back, the international community has to stop looking at other countries as monetary gain and start looking at countries as what is humane, what is ethical, what do these people deserve? And unfortunately, until that happens, I think that there's not much of a chance.
Professor Allison, you must be so proud of these students. They're really, really getting there and will do a lot to promote more understanding in the whole world, I guess. Carl, is there anything to close up with? Last comment.
One thing I was kind of thinking about was how, especially coming from a school of 30,000, of like in a city of 30,000 people, basically, it, a large, wheat field essentially. Excuse me, I got a cold going on. But in a city of 30,000 people plus an extra 30,000 people in Moscow, just 8 miles away, human tragedy, like especially for journalism students here, isn't really a thing that's like covered a lot, I would say. There was only one time where something really heavy happened, and that was last year when we had the University of Idaho quadruple homicides, where 4 students were stabbed in the middle of the night. And I remember a lot of these national media outlets basically swarmed the city of Moscow, which is just 8 miles away from Pullman. And basically, I remember they were just swarming the city. Basically, it felt as if, like, for the first time ever, I was like, a lot of these national media outlets don't seem like they care about the issue, and they rather just are swooping in for a story. And then I remember when we went to Armenia, one of the EVN reporters talked about how there was a European outlet who went to them and basically wanted them to be like their fixer for like the conflict of the war in 2020, and how she was basically like, no, I'm literally reporting this myself, like screw off. And I like, it was kind of like a comparison where I was like, a lot of national media outlets, while it is important to bring these stories to a national audience and an international audience, sometimes it can feel like, especially if you're close to the conflict itself, that a lot of these media outlets are like kind of swooping in and scavenging for a story instead of actively caring for that story. And there's like an ethical line between that. And I think a lot of journalists need to be able to kind of examine before they go into stories like this. And yeah, that's basically the main point I wanted to get across.
That's beautiful, beautiful. Maggie, in closing, any remarks?
Yeah, I think, going back to if there's any hope of going back to Nagorno-Karabakh, is that I think that there's just this juxtaposition of, everyone has a desire to feel safe and go home, but that there's also this fear between, like, even if negotiations are made and they're allowed to go back, it's like, will they ever really feel safe and there? And I think that, that's something that just cannot be described. Like, I can't even imagine losing your home and then feeling like, even if you can go back, is like, will you ever really feel safe there? And I think that that's something that is the struggle right now of, can we go back? But will we ever feel safe again when we go back? And so I think that that's something that we really saw was this, I want to go back, but will it be the same? And so.
Jasper, in closing?
I feel like my peers have said it so well. I think there's just, it was just an incredible opportunity. And I think as the last thing from me, the community there is just really what stood out. And I think that that will continue to be an important force for whatever next stage happens in ARTSA.
Beautiful, beautiful. Maggie, I'm going to listen to your radio program whenever you tell me when you are on the air. You are so eloquent and so passionate. In wrapping up, last comment, Maggie.
Yeah, so my name is pronounced Morgan, just to clarify, because me and Maggie's names are really similar. So I just wanted to throw that out there, just that I'm Morgan. But yeah, I would say that I think that to wrap up real fast is a lot of journalists do swoop in and scavenge. And I want to put emphasis on that real quick because I know that journalists have even asked like Armenian journalists to get the Azerbaijan side during the conflict. And I think that that is just a clear sign of blatant understanding and like lack of empathy is to ask a war zone journalist of the opposite side to go ask the other side. Like that'd be asking a journalist from Gaza to go up to an Israeli soldier and ask them what they think of this conflict and what their side is. And I think that it just really stood out to me how journalists really need to kind of get their act together when it comes to this type of stuff, because that's a horrific request in my opinion.
Professor Alison Boggs, once again, thank you. And a wrap-up comment.
One thing that really stuck with me when you guys are all talking about, takeaways was we also we went on an hour-long tour with a guide at the Armenian Genocide National Memorial. And the guide there said that in Azerbaijan, they were already in that disputed region. They were already renaming streets, including after one of the architects of the Armenian genocide. And that's something that it just is troubling to me to this day. I think the only way to heal from a dispute like this is to reach out, to be collaborative, to apologize for past wrongs. And a lot of that has not happened in this region. As one of our our founding dean, the person who's kind of putting together our international journalism lab once said to us, Armenia has enemies on two sides and it's a difficult way to live. And that really kind of brought that home to me. And so it feels somewhat hopeless. And I think my students have expressed it so well. And I had very little to do with their formation, but my heart bursts with pride in all of them, honestly.
You should feel very proud, and I feel very proud and thankful to all of you. And we just spoke to Professor Alison Boggs and to Jasper Wilson, Maggie Tolson, Morgan White, and Cole Quinn. And all I can say is thank you very much. Good luck on your studies. Be the best you can, whatever you decide. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.